18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Chanantan nations. Pursuant to the order of reference of April 20th, 2020, the committee is meeting for the purpose of receiving evidence concerning matters related to the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be available via the House of Commons website. During the meeting, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. In order to facilitate the work of our interpreters and ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules. Interpretation in the video conference will work very much like in regular committee. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. In order to resolve the sound issues, we ask those who wish to speak during meetings to set your interpretation language as follows. If speaking in English, please ensure you are on the English channel. If speaking in French, please ensure you are on the French channel. As you are speaking, if you plan to alternate from one language to the other, you will need to switch the interpretation channel to align with the language you are speaking. You may wish to allow for a short pause when switching languages. Before speaking, please wait till I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can either click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, or you can hold down the space bar while you are speaking. As you release the bar, it will mute itself like a walkie-talkie. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, they should use the raise hand function. This will signal to the chair your interest to speak, and in order to do so, click Participants at the bottom of the screen. When the list comes up, you'll see next to your name that you can click Raise Hand. I'll watch for that icon. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Use of headsets is strongly encouraged. If you have earbuds with a microphone, please hold the microphone near your mouth when you are speaking to boost the sound quality for our interpreters. Should technical challenges arise, please advise the chair or clerk immediately, and the technical team will work to resolve them. We may need to suspend during these times as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Before we get started, can everyone click on their screen top right-hand corner and ensure they are on gallery view? With this view, you should be able to see all participants in a grid. It will ensure that all video participants can see one another. And during the meeting, we'll follow the same rules that usually apply to the opening statements and the rounds for questioning. Witnesses have up to 10 minutes for an opening statement, and that is what we will be offering Ms. Bennett. And so if everyone is in order and in place, I'd like to welcome our first witness for this hour, the Honorable Carolyn Bennett, the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. Minister Bennett, welcome, and I'm giving you 10 minutes for your opening presentation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm joining you today from my home in Toronto on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I would also like to recognize the traditional territories from which all of you are participating. I'm pleased to be here today to speak about the ongoing work to develop a national action plan in response to the issues identified in the final report and the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls.
I think it's important that we recognize that when we all come to terms, With the horrifying images and stories over the past several weeks and the undeniable evidence of systemic racism in Canada, it is essential that all Canadians speak out against the racism inherent in colonization. We need to call out the misogyny and discrimination. In fact, it reflects the stories that we've heard for decades from the families and survivors of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited and gender-diverse peoples. We will not be able to stop this national tragedy until we have dealt effectively with the systemic racism and sexism in our institutions from coast to coast to coast. Every day, our hearts are with the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, two-spirit and gender-diverse people, and the survivors. I promise we will not let them down. I can assure members that our government is working on an urgent basis with our partners on further concrete actions to end the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, two-spirit and gender-diverse people, including the development of a national action plan. We are grateful for all the work of all the provincial and territorial and Indigenous partners towards a national action plan, despite the challenges of COVID-19. Our shared work continues to seek justice and healing for the families and survivors. We are working to create the space where Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, and gender-diverse people can take back their rightful place of dignity and leadership. Since our government was elected in 2015, we've put in place concrete actions to address the national tragedy, and the Family Information Liaison Units established in 2016 after the pre-inquiry were installed in victim services in every province and territory and have been very well received by families to help them navigate government agencies and to access all the available information they are seeking about their missing and murdered loved one and the system and access healing supports. Justice Canada is now providing funding to extend these supports to 2023. In 2017, we responded to the inquiry's interim report with nearly $50 million of investments, increasing health supports and victim supports for families and survivors, supporting the RCMP National Investigated Standards and Practice Unit, and funding organizations with expertise in law enforcement and policing to review police policies and practices. During the pre-inquiry, the stories of the families and survivors in their poignant testimony demanded changes to the damaging child and family services system, the need to value, preserve, and protect Indigenous language and culture, and the need to toughen criminal law in cases of domestic assault, and to eliminate gender discrimination under the Indian Act. We have legislated those changes. Our historic investments in education, housing, policing, and shelters are making a difference. We now know more is needed, and we are committed to continuing to make the necessary investments and to drive the needed institutional changes that will deal with the systemic and institutional failures that have led to this ongoing tragedy. Our government, Indigenous leaders, survivors' families, and the provincial and territorial governments are working hard to develop the National Action Plan that will set a clear roadmap to ensure that Indigenous women and girls and two-spirit and gender-diverse people are safe wherever they live. This work began long before COVID-19 and remains a priority. In recent months, fighting COVID-19 has demanded the attention of all of our partners and presented unique challenges for engagement for everyone. Since the election, we have been providing support to national and regional Indigenous organizations representing women, LGBTQ two-spirit people, to ensure that the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis voices are priorities at the center of our work. As I told the committee on Tuesday, for a national action plan to be truly accountable, we need to determine the indicators and the reporting timelines to ensure effective and accountable action plan. Governments must report, measure, adapt, measure, adapt. The families and survivors must be part of the work to make sure that this national action plan is truly effective. So the supplementary estimates, which passed this week, will provide this first $6 million of the $30 million over the next 5 years we have committed to ensure that families and survivors will be involved in assessing the results obtained by the National Action Plan and guiding the changes necessary to truly protect the lives of Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. I really look forward to your questions, your advice as we go forward together. Thank you. Merci, miigwech.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, and I appreciate your timeliness because I know that our questioners are eager to move forward. The first round is a 6-minute round, and I have Mr. Baptiste, Ms. Michaud, and Ms. Gazan, but I didn't get the Conservative Party speaker. So, Mr. Schmale, Mr. Zimmer, who will be up first? Mr. Zimmer. Mr. Zimmer, please go ahead. You have 6 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank the Minister for coming today and also some work on some local files that are very significant, and I appreciate your time on those. Just first question, Minister, we're here about MMIW, of course, this morning. The question is, the Native Women's Association of Canada, NWAC, as it's called, said it was appalled by your decision to delay the National Action Plan indefinitely. According to NWAC's president, Lorraine Whitman, the government is using the pandemic as an excuse. Others have used words like confused and disappointed. How do you respond to this reaction to your decision?
Well, I think the Native Women's Association is a very important partner as we go forward. We received their advice on what they consider important in a national action plan in the past month. I think it's going to be really important, as we heard from last night with the call with the Manitoba Coalition about that those on the front lines of protecting and advocating for Indigenous women and girls. We're also on the front line of COVID-19 and feeding the people in urban centers. And so I think that the people on the front lines understand, as well as our partners in the provinces and territories who had some very significant challenges. But we are very optimistic that we will have a national action plan. It will be good. It will be accountable, and it will, for the very first national public inquiry, include all of our partners with their own chapters and an accountability framework that will not let the families and survivors down.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. You brought up the plan, and I guess you spoke a little bit about what that plan looks like, but I'd like you to get into a little bit more depth and describe the progress to date of the National Action Plan, because we know that it's not here yet. Where is it at? How soon are you ready to roll it out and get it going?
So we are now in the process of having to build the plan bottom up, and it means that each of the provinces and territories are working on their chapter. So we had a very positive call with Yukon last month because they were almost ready to release their 4-point plan as we go forward. Yesterday, we heard from Manitoba, and again, I think that when the provincial or territorial government works with the women's coalitions as well as the First Nations or Inuit or Métis partners, you can see what happens in terms of those concrete actions to stop this tragedy, but also the healing. So we are moving forward. One of the things I talked about on Tuesday was, of course, choosing the indicators that will be measured and how often they'll be measured and how we move out over the next 5 years to make sure this National Action Plan is working is something that will need consensus as to the appropriate indicators, how often they're measured, how often the families and survivors think the plan needs to be adapted in order to make it more effective. So that, I think, is really important work. As you know, with statistics, there's some that are easy to find at Stats Canada. There's others that we're going to have to be more intentional about finding. And we learned through COVID-19 that unless we have the data in real time, that we are operating in the dark and that we want to be accountable and show results.
And I know you've just spoken about, and consultation is a big part of this process, or is supposed to be. And I know a minister can only do so much, but how do you respond to statements that the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls are not being consulted or kept up to date on the progress?
Well, I think as we have learned from the families and survivors, and that there is a very important relationship that they have or need to have with their province and territory, that in order to build this up, everything is about making sure that we have effective measures on the ground, and then lift up those to a working plan or a national action plan that includes the wise and best practices of all the regions. Building on strength is what I've heard from. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are things that are working, like the family liaison units. And so as we move forward, we will ensure that families and survivors are in the appropriate working groups and are part of developing the plan, but we really want them to be essential and central to the evaluation of whether the plan is working as we go forward over the next 5 years. And that's what the $6 million per year for 5 years, it has been built into the supplementary estimates this week.
Just 30 seconds left, and Bob, could interpretation needs your mic up a bit.
Okay, I'll just lean in a little further. We're just about at time, so thank you, Minister, for that. I know there's a lot of people waiting for this to happen, and I know I'm a British Columbia resident and close to Prince George, and have sadly seen far too many stories, far too many families affected by this, and I know everybody's looking for a solution to this huge problem and situation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Batiste, you have 6 minutes.
Minister, on Wednesday of this week, I attended a healing walk in my riding, where we were marching to bring awareness and highlight our need to take action against racism. Along the way of about a kilometer walk, we stopped in and paid respects in all of the areas in that area where we have lost Mi'kmaq people, and without ever getting any answers as to why. And it was very humbling to see this. And during that time, I was approached by Annie Bernard Daisley, president of the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, and she shared with me the frustration that she felt that we haven't acted fast enough on the missing and murdered Indigenous women's recommendations. I shared with her that I would be willing to come talk to them and give them an update. Minister, can you share with me what steps are we taking to address the recommendations, our timeframes, and can you share with the committee some of the key things you've been hearing during your engagements?
Well, thank you for this, Jaime, and I think the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association has been really on the front of so many of the real concrete actions, and certainly in your province, speaking with Minister Kelly Regan and developing together with the Native Women's Association, a Nova Scotia plan that is going to be really important. As I said in my remarks, I think that that we right from the beginning weren't going to wait for the final report to begin the work on the legislation that would protect women and girls and two-spirit and gender diverse people, but the investments in shelters and housing and healthcare, the healing supports, the commemoration money that Minister Monsef has been able to distribute, that it is about us working together now on developing that national action plan that will be accountable. And we do know that it's urgent and that the families and survivors have been waiting a long time for there to be a commission. And now we are impatient about putting in the concrete actions to stop the tragedy. And we believe that we've begun as a federal government in a good way to deal with the response to the interim report and now the kinds of priorities the families of survivors have been saying to us for a very long time.
Minister, one of the things that there's been a lot of discussion on lately is the systematic racism within the system, where Mi'kmaq people and Indigenous people across Canada don't feel that they're getting the same treatment in the justice system as regular Canadians. And we know that this is an all government, all provincial, municipal, federal approach. Can you tell me a little bit about how we're working with our partners across the different government jurisdictions to ensure that the future, that Mi'kmaq women will grow up believing in a justice system that's going to help them, that's going to look after them, and that won't victimize them?
As you know, Jaime, that throughout the pre-inquiry, what we heard from families was it's a justice system, just not us. And I think that is really what they feel. It's not a safe place to even report a missing person. And I think, as I've said, that some of the families chose not to correct a missing person report that said the person was Caucasian, because they thought the quality of the search or the investigation would be of less importance if indeed it was viewed to be an Indigenous woman. Whereas we know what happened in the downtown East Side, where somehow when somebody went missing, it was viewed as inevitable. And filled with judgment. And so we have a lot to do, because it's not just the policing or the investigation. It's then what happens, and in terms of the charges that are laid, the plea bargaining, the sentencing, that Indigenous people do not feel that it is fair, and thus we see all the unacceptable incarceration rates, where often the victim is blamed in the way that they feel that they've been treated. So I think we're working with our partners in the provinces and territories. We had a very positive call yesterday with National Chief Perry Bellegarde and Regional Chiefs TG and Picard on moving forward with Minister Blair, Minister Lametti, myself, Minister Miller. Were on a call about the commitment to First Nations policing and moving forward on the tripartite agreement that could be almost ready to go in British Columbia, in terms of how you change policing to be more community-based and with community members, like we heard of the excellent approach in Yukon with the peace officers that are reducing the calls to the RCMP by 30%. So I think having the right to and the statutory funding for First Nations policing, and it'll be interesting to see whether the Mi'kmaq Nation is also interested in that, following up on the excellent progress that you have had on education, whether we could move that to First Nations policing in Nova Scotia as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And our next speaker is Madame Michaud. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to mention that I'm still in Auguste, BC, on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your opening statement. I agree with you, and it's refreshing to hear a minister recognize openly the existence of systemic racism in Canada. And
Semaine prochaine, alors je suis très emballée par ça.
I understand that the National Action Plan that will be tabled this month won't be tabled. Do you have a new framework to share with us? It is very important to hear you say that you're supporting the need to act with regard to systemic racism. All of our institutions are involved here in the field of education, in our justice system, etc. For me, these are the effects of colonization, the ramifications of colonization. white people thought they were superior. And now, in all of our institutions, we see the fallout. And I believe it is impossible to completely eradicate the tragedy of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls that we've seen without this essential work that we have to do to eradicate systemic racism. We agree fully, and I'm convinced that this national action plan, based on the results of the inquiry, will contribute. I do hope it will contribute to finding solutions. There are an awful lot of people who are waiting for this plan. They're very anxious to see it tabled. The Native Women's Association of Canada, the families, they're very anxious to know what's going to be done. So do we have a time frame? Do we know when this is going to be tabled? Yes, I believe that the first step will be to arrive at a consensus with regard to the indicators in order to ensure that the action plan provides for the necessary accountability measures in order for us to combat this tragedy with families and survivors. It's very important for me that we have this plan for the next 5 years with indicators and accountability. A plan with a chapter for each province and territory, for the First Nations, for the Métis, for the Inuit, and also for other diverse groups in our population. So if I understand correctly, various provinces, Quebec, the families are involved in the process, so it's still underway, this process. Are we talking about 3 months, 6 months? Might we expect that this action plan could be tabled during the course of 2020? I hope to see it tabled as early as possible. An example: the good work of Ministers Lebel and Damour in your province after the national inquiry and the Vienna Convention. We've seen that this work must inform the national plan. And I do hope that the plan will come as quickly as possible, but it must be a true plan with accountability. And I imagine that the funding that will accompany that plan will be able to deliver concrete results. It was supposed to be tabled in June, so this work must be progressing well. Do we have an idea of the concrete action that the government will be taking to find solutions to the problems described during the course of the inquiry? In the Zoom calls that we've had, we were able to underscore the need to extend the efforts made with a lot of investment on the part of the federal government. We need safe transportation. We must make the necessary investments in health, mental health, shelters, and prevention. And support for the families and survivors.
Madam Minister, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
You're up for a 6-minute round of questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Minister for attending today. On Tuesday, you stated, in quotes, "This has been an emotional time. We have been upset by the images on our screens and the undeniable evidence of systemic racism in Canada and murdered Indigenous women and girls." You acknowledge this
Was I?
promise. reneged on its promise to have a national action plan in June, in spite of increased violence against Indigenous women that has occurred during COVID-19. Do you believe that inaction is an appropriate response? You had at least 8 months prior to COVID. Chief Commissioner Buller notes that for that excuse to be used, that is an embarrassment to the government. Women, girls, 2S, LGBTQIA people continue to go missing and die. When will a national action plan be released?
Well, firstly, thank you for your advocacy, but I also want to say that that the work commenced immediately after the National Inquiry report was tabled. The Assistant Deputy Ministers committees were struck amongst all the provinces and territories. Right after the election, we were able to begin funding the Indigenous organizations that needed to engage with their people. Those reports are only recently in because of some of the delays of COVID, but the work continues, and the response to the interim report. We will not let these families and survivors down. We're going to get this done, and it's going to be and lots of people believe that this, because of the intensity of the kind of discovery of wise practices and respect across the country.
Minister Bennett, with all due respect, that is not an acceptable response. Families, advocates, and even the commissioners have voiced their concerns over the lack of transparency. In a letter, the commissioners themselves called it 1 year of inaction with a lack of transparency, in quotes. When I tried to get answers from you about when you will release a national action plan, you simply told me to go look at a website. Last month, Hilda Anderson Pierce of Manitoba MMIW G2S Coalition said, in quotes, "It is really concerning for me as a family member and as an advocate that we've heard nothing." And this is what we've been hearing from family members across the country. You promised again today not to let them down. It's too late. And your frantic scrambling we have witnessed over the last weeks clearly demonstrated that you have wasted at least 8 months since the release of the report, despite your promise to have it 1 year following its tabling. Can you grace this committee with at least the stage at which the National Action Plan is at?
Yes, thank you. And I really do dispute the word inaction. From the half day I spent with the federal and provincial territorial ministers on the status of women in December, where we asked them to begin identifying their wise practice and begin building their plan. We have been doing the same at the federal level. So I am impressed by the work that's been going on, and particularly by the Manitoba Coalition. They had
again, Minister, those are not my words. Those are the words of commissioners and family members and victims of violence. I have one last question because I have a limited amount of time. A year ago, when the MMIW G2S report was released, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Blanchet, stated, in quotes, "It is very important that Canada will make an action plan a national action plan," end of quotes. It has been over a year now since the report was released, and the international community can see that nothing has been done with respect to the ongoing human rights violations against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ individuals. Did your government expect to secure a UN Security Council seat when you clearly turned a blind eye to the human rights violations at home and abroad, in violation of your domestic and international human rights obligations, including your failure to release a national action plan?
I think the comment that's the most important in what you've read there is the fact that it needs to be a national action plan. This is not a federal report that I can just write and table. This has to have the partnership of every single province and territory, and we have that.
Reiterating your promise, Minister. Your government promised to have a national action plan tabled 1 year after the report is released. These are not my words. This is your government's words. When will the national action plan be released? I would like a date.
1 minute.
We see this as urgent as well, and we will work with our provinces and territories and the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners, our two-spirited partners, an urban plan. We need a really good plan, but the most important thing I would like you to help me with would be, what would be the indicators that you would say that we would be able to show?
Almost a year, Minister, to figure all of these things out. The fact that you've now reneged on your promise, I would like to show your commitment about your indicating that this is urgent by actually having a national action plan. What date can we expect a national action plan?
We will have a national action plan when our partners believe that it is appropriate to release with a consensus, and that we are working with our partners to make that as soon as possible.
Thanks, Minister. And we go now for 5-minute rounds with, I have Mr. Schmale, Pawlowski, Viersen, and Ms. Zan. Mr. Schmale, 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister. It's great to see you again. When you talked about your plan and working with your partners, can you give us a brief idea of how many partners you have, and how you expect to achieve consensus with each and every one of those groups and individuals?
Thanks very much for the question. So we start with 13 partners, which is every province and territory, and then we have been very grateful to the input of obviously the AFN Women's Council, the Michif women as part of the Métis Nation, Paututik, and they have done their engagement to be able to inform this plan in the best possible way. NWAC has done its work, and the new organization, Two Spirit in Motion, that really did an excellent job of bringing together what they believe needs to be part of a national action plan. We have many other partners that are informing this, and particularly as we develop the indicator data working group to be able to make sure that their engagement now informs what will be an accountable plan over the next 5 years, where we will want to be able to ensure the families and survivors that we're getting results with this plan.
So just building on what Ms. Gazan was talking about, it's been over a year, and again, it's your government's words, not hers or mine. Given the fact that you are working with other partners, how much longer do you think it'll be to achieve consensus? And can you tell us what some of the stumbling blocks is, so maybe this committee can help?
Well, that's a great question. And I think when we saw what happened in Yukon, where the Women's Circle plus the First Nations plus Chief Doris Bill, who has a wise practice on peace officers, together with Minister Dendies and the government of the Yukon, that they already were almost ready to release a plan before COVID-19 in their 4 points. And so we are working with all of the provinces and territories. I think that in your province, Jamie, that Minister Dunlop is working with an advisory committee, but in Ontario, the family liaison units and Kim Murray have really become a wise practice as we build on strength and make sure that the National Action Plan reflects the wise and promising practices in all of the provinces and territories.
So, Minister, in a CTV News article, you were quoted as saying, "We acknowledge we must redouble our efforts to eliminate the systemic racism arising from colonial policies and attitudes," when talking about the report. So, having said that, are you considering, or is your department considering speaking or talking more openly to providing off-ramps to those who want to get away from the Indian Act, which is considered racist by many people on all sides of the political spectrum and within Canada in general?
Absolutely. And I think even the comments I had about the conversation yesterday on First Nations policing, this is all about self-determination and being able to get out of the colonial systems that have not been safe for the Indigenous peoples in our country. And so if we look at over half of the Indian Act bands in Canada are now at a table, being able to talk about asserting their jurisdiction on whether it's child and family services, whether it's fish, whether it's education, healthcare, that we are actually, I think, really building towards that kind of momentum in nation building. We have funding for nation building, and we have a lot of I think, excellent work that really will speak to a new relationship that will really be based on the recognition of rights and the right to self-determination, as well as respect and cooperation and something that feels like a partnership to our partners.
Minister, or sorry, Chair, how much time do I have?
20 seconds.
I will address that in the second round. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much, because we want to ensure that all of our question rounds are complete. And next is Mr. Pawlowski for 5 minutes.
Minister, thanks for being here. I wanted to talk a bit about the National Action Plan. I realize you've spoken to a lot of people in various communities, especially the Indigenous community, as to what goes into the National Action Plan. I wanted to find out what you were hearing, especially from the Indigenous community, as to what is needed in developing not only an effective national plan, but an accountable one. And in responding, I'd like you really to talk about both, but especially the issue of accountability. How can you make such a plan accountable and ensure that, in fact, that we're delivering on the plan and it's actually having results?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for us really being able to underline the need of better data. I think we've learned through COVID-19 that we weren't getting good data, and we certainly weren't getting it in real time, and that you can't really manage what you don't measure. And so for us to be able to honor our pledge to the families and survivors that we will put in concrete actions to stop this tragedy, we're going to have to show whether it's working or not. And so that is why the working group on data will build out the kind of indicators they would want measured, and whether that's high school leaving or whether it's the children in care, whether it's in the kinds of things in the incarceration, over incarceration of Indigenous people. We have a lot of indicators that we will need to be measuring so that we flatten that curve. In the way that data matters. I wanted to speak to you a little bit about even the kind of education that emergency physicians are now being asked to understand, being able to identify trafficking and not allowing that adult into the examining room with the young person thinking we're being nice as doctors, but that actually might be a trafficked person who isn't able to speak to you frankly. So I think we're learning a lot as we listen to families, we listen to victims of trafficking, we listen coast to coast to coast, but the measurement piece is going to be the reason that this is indeed a national action plan where we have to show results.
How are you going to get those statistics? Is this StatsCan you're talking about, or where are these statistics going to come from?
Well, I think that the sort of disaggregated data has always been difficult to get, and I think even in COVID, we're now learning that people know they better collect it if we're going to actually be able to be effective in treating it. And I think that we have to take the same intentional approach to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit and gender diverse. That this is about us. I think, I think I've always worried that the things that are already at StatsCan are easier to collect and measure. There are probably some indicators that we're not measuring right now that we should be measuring, and that those will be harder to get. But I think that the national inquiry has meant that we need a national plan for this, and that will mean going and getting that data that will inform the efficacy of a plan.
1 minute.
Certainly, in talking to people about statistics related to COVID-19, a common complaint from people in the public health community is lack of consistent data from, for example, hospitals and healthcare systems, and some of that is apparently because of concerns over privacy, but there seems to be a kind of commonality there that we're not getting the kind of healthcare statistics that would probably also be needed to inform the national plan. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts as to how to make healthcare data more accessible to epidemiologists and policymakers.
What was interesting in talking with the Manitoba Coalition was that there's also the qualitative data, the stories, and whether it's that an Indigenous person dies in a merge of a bladder infection because somebody thought he was intoxicated is evidence of a problem. And so I think that it will be interesting to continue to collect the qualitative data, the not only what was said or what was done, but how someone was made to feel is again this ongoing aggression.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We go now to Mr. Viersen for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to our guests and witnesses for being here. Dr. Bennett, how are you today?
Good, thanks.
Good. For months, your government was saying that we shouldn't be wearing masks, and then that messaging changed. Do you remember on what date that message changed?
All I can tell you, Arnold, is that it's a fight I've been having with my boys from the beginning, because as a physician, I was basing it on the evidence we had to date as to how this virus was transmitted, and at the beginning, we did not believe it could be transmitted in that way. So I have to say that I'm not wearing a mask when I go to the grocery store, and my sons are saying, "We told you so."
It was May the 20th. So our First Nation communities were probably at risk for the time where they weren't wearing masks. Is the government providing masks now to Indigenous people?
Absolutely, and I think Minister Miller will be able to expand on that, in the next panel. I have a call every Thursday night with some of the Indigenous physicians working in community across the country, and they are, dealing with the reality of as the evidence changes, the advice changes too, and so that's. But I think always they were knowing in terms of the kind of protection to deal with an elders center or deal with other issues that they were being provided with the personal protective equipment in order to be able to do their work.
Do you have any idea how many masks have been shipped to First Nations communities to this point?
I think that Minister Miller and the deputy will be able to explain it. It's quite a large number, and also there was the other kinds of protections, in the non-medical settings. Some of the people who've had put in the what's the word? The checkpoints, going in and out of their communities, those kinds of things that, again, that those people also needed to have masks, and we, have continued to provide what the nations need in order to keep their communities safe.
Okay. Have we had any problems with First Nations communities getting faulty masks? Has that been an issue?
I don't know, and again, that is in Minister Miller and with Dr. Gideon, Dr. Wong, Dr. Adams, they will be able to tell you in the next little while. As you know, lots of people were buying from various, suppliers, but our job is to support whatever they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's been reported that we've ordered like 10 million, or we've ordered 120 million masks and have gotten about 10 million, of which 9 of them don't meet N95 standards. And PSPC is saying that they're redirecting them to other organizations outside of the health system. So I was just wondering if that was ending up in our First Nations communities.
Again, I think Minister Miller and Minister INAN will be able to answer that. I have to tell you that N95 masks are not comfortable to wear, and that our job to make sure that the medical people have those masks, and that we, and I was so touched when I received some beautiful masks, cloth masks, homemade by Angela Bishop, who in Saskatchewan was providing them for the elders as well as the veterans. And it's been very impressive to see that work, just start up so fast in terms of the beautiful seamstresses being able to turn it into providing safety for their communities in the beautiful cloth masks.
Thank you. That's just about it, Arnold. 5 seconds. And thank you very much. We'll move on now. And I appreciate everyone being for your timeliness. Miss Zan, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, hello there, and thank you, Minister Bennett, for coming back to our committee today. I want to welcome everybody from the beautiful Mi'kmaq territory, unceded territory here in Cobequid, Way-Cobequid, as it used to be called, in Cumberland, Colchester. Listen, we were talking the other day about systemic racism, and I was listening to various programs, CBC and various things recently, and reading a lot, of course. But the thing is, what a lot of people are saying about systemic racism is we need to keep hiring First Nations and Black members of the community and diversity, more diversity in jobs, have more businesses, and also in government, in levels of government. And one of the things that I remember when I was in provincial government here in Nova Scotia, I had an argument with the deputy minister of a particular department, because the all-white staff just couldn't understand that our Mi'kmaq Community Center and Museum did not own their own artifacts, because they felt the ancestors owned them. And to try and explain that to somebody who just doesn't get it doesn't get the culture, I finally had to say, look, you're Scottish from Cape Breton, right? Well, imagine if you weren't allowed to sing in Gaelic, you weren't allowed to do your dances, you weren't allowed to do the Highland dances, you would be thrown in jail, you're not allowed speaking your own language. These are the problems that have been building up, and people just don't understand the culture. And again, as we mentioned the other day, it's a lack of respect too. What can we do, Minister, to try and change that as quickly as possible? And I think that this will help deal with the problem of why First Nations women and girls are treated like not even second-class citizens, but they're just not respected and treated it with the value, and their lives don't seem to be as valued as others. And so what do you suggest we can do as a society and as a government?
Thank you for the question. And I think that, in Indigenous Peoples History Month and in what we've been trying to do with Indigenous Reads, that I sort of think that from all of the books here, it's hard. I wish I could change it, but I think prescribing all the books in the world and lovely, amazing films by Indigenous filmmakers is a start, but it is about a relationship. It is about respect. It is about having Indigenous people and women and girls in leadership, and making sure that they are able to influence the institutions. It's not, and I think in Indigenous works and Kelly Lindsay's work in Saskatchewan, it's not about changing the Indigenous person to be able to fit into an institution. It's changing the institution such that Indigenous people feel safe, but also how they can influence that Indigenous worldview is really the future of Canada. Thinking 7 generations out, the medicine wheel instead of the medical model, Indigenous pedagogy, respecting elders, putting children first, listening to wise women. All of these things were here and were good until the settlers arrived and decided they were superior. And so that's what we've got to change. And, we need, I believe you shouldn't have to be an MD or a MP in order to have new friends. And we've got to make it safer for people, Indigenous people, to want to work in government. It's for a lot of them, it's going to the dark side, and we need to really be intentional about those kinds of changes in policing, in hospitals, in universities, and all of the institutions that you've had that experience with as well.
Well, thank you very much. We're right at time there.
Thank you.
And we have a 2.5-minute round of questioning now with Ms. Berube and Ms. Kakak. Ms. Berube, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. In preamble, I would like to thank all of the participants and the witnesses today. I'm having a few technical glitches, but I'd like to thank the participants, the technical services, the interpreters. I'm on the traditional territory of the Algonquins and the Cree Abitibi. So my question is for Minister Bennett. Why is it the families of missing and murdered Indigenous girls and women are not consulted or informed regarding the National Action Plan? Thank you very much for that very good question. It is absolutely vital that we hear the voices from the families in order to plan and to develop the plan. But it's also key to ensure the accountability of this plan. It is also important that we have indicators and measures in place for the next 5 years. That's $6 million from the supplementary estimates that we saw this week is going to fund the commitments among families and their survivors. This is going to enable them to achieve results in the plan. So they will be informed. Will they be consulted depending on the plan that you're going to outline? Is that right? Yes. As well, the provinces and territories are also taking measures through Minister Damour and Minister Labelle, following the Vienne Commission. And there are also the answers from the National Inquiry. All of this is very important. It's important to involve families based on this, and it is also important to involve the survivors for the plan in Quebec, but as well for the national plan.
We have one more question from around for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Kakak, please go ahead.
But no, Chair. Thank you, Chair. It's again an incredibly difficult conversation when growing up, my non-Indigenous mother, when I traveled south, always made me take extra precautions because she said, if I go missing, I don't know who's going to look for you besides me. We lose countless of our Indigenous sisters and women You had mentioned to my member, my colleague, member Gazan, that while the action plan started in June of 2019, that the funding to partners flowed after election in October of 2019. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, that is correct.
So it's interesting that it took over 5 months to actually start getting things done. How many partners are there? What is the number for that?
Well, I can certainly, it starts with all the provinces and territories, so 13 there. And then I think the funded organizations were the Assembly of First Nations Women's Council, the Congress of Aboriginal People, the Institute of Advancement of Aboriginal Women, Les Femmes Chif.
I just want a number, Minister.
Well, in terms of the Pautudik, obviously, to Spirit in Motion.
You have mentioned all of these, Minister. I'm just asking for a number.
The number, there is in terms of funded ones, but then there are lots of other advice coming as well.
Find me a number, and then I would love to know how many you have yet to hear from, because you've stated that is something that is a barrier, and I think that that's something that's an easy fix. Find the number of partners. How many do you have yet to hear from, and reach out to them. The National Action Plan has had a year to be developed. COVID has had given us lost time, but by my math, that's about 77%. Is it fair to say that the action plan is 77% complete?
Well, again, it's a matter of the work of our provinces and territories, like Yukon yesterday with Manitoba. We've in talking with both your minister, Elizabeth, that it is going to be a collaborative effort, and that we will have a chapter for each province and territory. And so we want to be able to move forward in a good way with the consensus to make sure this plan is effective.
10 seconds, Ms. Kakay.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, honestly, I've just put my hands up. It's very frustrating to hear these conversations all the time when our women and children are having their safety compromised, and we lose lives.
Thank you.
I agree with you.
We're right at time, Minister. I'm sorry. Because we have some work to do for our next panel. Minister, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I know you're having a busy day. We all are.
Yes.
I'm going to suspend now, and we'll need to do some sound checks and have some other business as we prepare for the next round. So we'll suspend for just a few minutes.
Throughout the pandemic, Mr. Miller, in my role as Shadow Minister, I've had many opportunities to connect with Indigenous people across the country, businesses, individuals, organizations. One of the organizations that I've had the privilege of kind of working with and getting to know and advocating for is the Aboriginal Friendship Centers of Saskatchewan. As an MP that represents Northern Saskatchewan, there's 10 friendship centers in Saskatchewan, 5 of them are in my riding. Recently, they released a Saskatchewan economic framework called Honoring Her Spark. And during their engagement, as they prepared this report, many suggestions in the report respond to the calls for action found in the MMIWG report that we were discussing earlier. My question for you is what specific actions is the government taking to help support entrepreneurship among Indigenous women, and what effect do you believe that might have on this very important issue that we were talking about in the last hour? I realize that your department's also involved in this, and thus the question.
Well, as you rightly note, Gary, and look, first and foremost, thank you for the advocacy and the work. And I've noted it in prior sessions, but I think it's worth repeating that your team has been doing, linking up with our department and advocating for very complex situations, and particularly what's been going on in La Loche and the response that has had to be done at all levels of government to support the spread of COVID in northern Saskatchewan. At the heart of this, and the MMIW calls to action is not for a federal response only, and nor is a Crown Indigenous Relations response only. It is entirely whole of government, civil society, provincial and territorial responses. Part of the calls to action demand from Indigenous services, if we look in terms of how the civil service reacts to those calls to action within what Indigenous Services Canada does. And what you're getting at the very heart of that is what the report highlighted as well as socioeconomic conditions, inequalities that unduly and disproportionately negatively affect women and create the conditions that you've highlighted and we've heard in testimony. One of those calls to action included what we've rolled over last week, response and funding, capital funding for shelters that support Indigenous women fleeing violence. Indeed, in COVID, we've seen a significant increase in violence, than domestic violence, and the corresponding need for those supports. In regards to the friendship centers and the various service organizations that do an incredible job with very little resources, our government has moved quite quickly with $15 million, which was wholly inadequate, and then $75 million, which is in the process of being rolled out to specifically organizations that serve Indigenous peoples, among those women, children fleeing violence. Again, it falls within the responsibility of Indigenous Services Canada, but also other levels of government at the federal level and across the spectrum of government services and civil society services in Canada. So it's one aspect of it, but it is a very important part to the MMIW response, because it can't simply be a piecemeal approach. It needs to be complete and comprehensive, and supports for women in those situations that are key, and Indigenous Services Canada has to do its part.
Thank you. I want to get onto one more question for you here, as obviously we're working with limited time. Dion and I had the privilege of traveling to La Ronge this past week, and where we got to engage many important stakeholders and kind of the impact of COVID-19 in that area. While we were there, we were able to observe the fact that they were having a groundbreaking ceremony or celebration of the funding that was promised in the election for this wellness, healing, and recovery center that's been funded on that side. And I want to thank you for the commitment to follow through on that. I also had the opportunity this week to speak to Chief Ronald Mitswing, who you would be very, very aware of the advocacy that he's done through the whole Makwasagai situation that you came upon, I think, on your first day as the minister, and how that all played out. We've talked a lot about the Northwest Saskatchewan with La Loche and with Clearwater River Dene Nation. I'm just curious if the government would be supportive of considering a center like you're funding on the east side over in La Ronge for something on the west side. There's obviously great needs for Chief Ronald Mitswing and many of his colleagues on the west side as well. And if that's something that you've ever talked about or considered a similar type of facility on the northwest side of Saskatchewan to help that side of the province as well.
Less than a minute.
Yeah, and it's an excellent point that you raised, because in my discussions with Chief Mitswing at the very, as you noted at the very beginning of my mandate, he was facing a crisis within his community and is not unique. But communities have unique needs, in particularly in mental health, and the solutions lie within communities. I think one of the criticism we heard from the chief, it was the challenge with having solutions that are sort of flown in, or even when it comes to tribal councils and their supports that they have, which are very good, but the increased needs, both financial but also homegrown, and the ability to do that can only be done within infrastructure solutions that are always undercapitalized, and I think it's something we got to take away and keep working on. But we have indeed done great work in ensuring that the capital is there for services, buildings, infrastructure that can house that increasing pressure, in particular on mental health.
That's our time. Thank you.
I can't make a direct commitment, but glad to keep working on it.
Mr. Pawlowski, you have 6 minutes.
Minister, I know that there are a lot of Indigenous communities, and your department was trying to help a lot of different communities across Canada rapidly get ready for possible cases of COVID-19, the pandemic. I've been in touch with you about several of these communities, and I'm always really impressed that you seem to know something about or a lot about some very small communities, and I think that was indicated in your response to Mr. Vidal. So I think this meeting was primarily called in regards to what happened at Matayas-Colombe Cree Nation, and I wonder if you could tell us what is being done in order to address the needs of that particular community.
Yes, and MP Pawlowski, and thank you for, again, your interaction with our department in ensuring the needs in your riding are met and heard. We've been working from the get-go at an accelerated rate, and obviously getting ahead of this curve has been the reason why Indigenous communities have had such optimistic outcomes, because they've been able to predict, communicate, and opening that line of communication, making sure that procurement is being done in a timely fashion and distributed. In the case of Matayas-Colombe, there were some movable structures that we were looking at centrally as part of a central procurement to deal with surge capacity, to have movable structures that are in great demand for communities that need isolation capacity or more testing capacity. And so the company in question proactively released a press release that frankly mischaracterized what was being sent into the community, and the community rightly so reacted. And our department apologized for the miscommunication, but it was an issue of communication and coordination with their pandemic plan. And essentially what Matayas-Colombe wanted was, and which we have funded to the tune of about 400,000, was a repurposing of one of their community centers as part of their pandemic plan, and not the movable structures that we were proactively sourcing with the view to distribute them into a variety of communities that do have those challenges that have been highlighted to committee. And I think essentially that's the crux of it.
And I think from what I've heard that the community is actually quite happy in what's ensued after this initial controversy. Am I not right with that?
Yeah, look, I believe so. The frustration that a number of communities feels existed prior to the pandemic, because we're dealing with socioeconomic determinants that make that vulnerability more acute. And, we're asked to do things in Indigenous Services Canada that we don't have to do in non-Indigenous communities because those conditions don't exist. So that frustration is very real. But ensuring that we communicate and essentially deal with the cards that were dealt and proactively source units for isolation and medical purposes, actively knowing that there has not been an outbreak, is very important. So I think always that line of communication, making sure local needs are addressed, is important. And
Are you still there? Oh,
the credit does go to the community at proactively.
I was chief of staff for a couple of years in Norway House in northern Manitoba. I wondered what specifically was being done for the communities in Manitoba in order to prepare them for possible outbreaks in those communities.
Yes, and knowing Manitoba First Nations have done really an exceptional job in our work with the regional chief, with Grand Chief Arlen Dumas, making sure that we are responding to needs has been the core of this, and making sure that they communicate with our regional teams, knowing that we proactively source surge capacity material and resources and be ready to react on a moment's notice. We take nothing for granted. The resource and work that has been done by First Nations to have a First Nations-led data approach is really exemplary across Canada. So a lot of the credit is frankly owed to local leadership. Obviously some luck, we can't discount that, but proactive and aggressive. It hasn't occurred yet in Manitoba, but those communities across the country that have reacted the best have let, frankly, medical leadership take the front and allow people to communicate so that you have a health response to really a health problem.
Mr. Chair, is there any time left?
There's a minute left.
Oh, a minute left. I haven't actually prepared for the question. As NDP
we need to save that. We need to save that minute because we have to vote on a budget item before 1 o'clock. So we'll move on now to Ms. Michaud, and you have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for your presence. Thank you as well to the ministers who are making an effort to respond in French. I would like to come back to the motion that has brought us here today. Mr. Miller, you didn't have the opportunity to make your opening statement, but I did read it. And you admit that your government made mistakes with regard to the supply process. The information wasn't sent to the leaders of the community that you just discussed with Mr. Pawlowski. And I would like to give you the opportunity to explain how things went, what happened, what were the reasons why the information wasn't relayed to the leaders in the community. First of all, Ms. Michaud, I'm delighted to be able to express myself here in French, especially since I'm in Montreal, attending this meeting from Montreal. What happened, and it's the nature of the beast to some extent, because this pandemic was very unprecedented, unpredictable. We had to be proactive to be able to source structures, products, very expensive equipment. We had to have a pandemic plan taking into account the various provinces, province by province. We had to move forward. And our department, Indigenous Services, was involved. We had to take into account all of the vulnerabilities, the remoteness of some communities, etc. And the need was to react proactively with these mobile structures that were in high demand for isolation purposes. And also in some communities, there was overpopulation. That was an issue in the context of Mathias Colombe. There was a request for help, and the community, in the context of its pandemic plan, wanted to refit a community center, and this is something that we did with $400,000. That was the injection of monies. There was a press release that was put out by the company too hastily. That's what happened, and it was a mistake. So our department, of course, apologized in the situation, and we maintained our proactive communication with the community to ensure that their needs were taken care of proactively. And it's a lesson learned. When you act in real time, mistakes are possible.
My next question is maybe more for Minister Anand. as far as the council, the supply council for the COVID-19, in the first press release, you said that they would provide advice to the government for the purchase of essential goods and services. Then when you appeared on the Standing Committee on Government Operations, you said that the council doesn't really have any role to play in that procurement. So I just want to have some clarification on this. What is the role of the supply of the COVID-19 Supply Council specifically?
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for your question. And it looks like I have to switch channels here. Thank you for your question. I'm pleased to be here today. And today,
territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples from Oakville, Ontario, but from these lands of these peoples. I would like to say en réponse de la question.
In answer to your question, the council was put in place to provide advice on the federal government projects to make sure that there is a supply for personal protective equipment and medical supplies to counter this pandemic. The members of the council do not have a role in government procurement at all. We only have 2 sessions, and during the 2 sessions we had, we discussed the supply hub.
And sellers on the Government of Canada's website. Mais il n'y a pas.
But there is no role at all in contract awarding, in discussions related to the contracts, and the issues we discussed have all been put up on our website. Thank you.
Ashton, you are next. And Ms. Ashton, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm really pleased that we're having this meeting today as a result of my colleague, MP Kakek's work. It is a very important meeting, and we need to get answers. Pakitawagan deserves answers. I want to start off by saying that Pakitawagan Matthias Colomb is a remote First Nation here in northern Manitoba. And it's done everything in its power to keep its community safe, like many other First Nations. In the midst of all of this, through the CBC News, they found out that a company in Newfoundland was making tents that specialized tents that they never asked for. Imagine that. Then they went on to find out, and we all went on to find out, that the chair of the board of the company that made these tents is the former Liberal cabinet minister on the government's supply council for COVID-19. So the plot thickens. The reality is that this excuse that ISC was trying to be proactive doesn't stand up to the test. Pakitawagan deserves answers. How is it that these tents were destined for this First Nation when nobody asked for them? So my question to you, Minister Miller, is who in your department made this request on behalf of Pakitawagan? Why Pakitawagan and no other First Nations, including other remote First Nations here in Manitoba or elsewhere?
Well, thank you, Ms. Ashton, for the question. I think in response to your question, and I believe my office has sent you the answer from our department, we need to understand how surge capacity resourcing works, and as part of that, we need to profile and model communities that are vulnerable. And as you've highlighted, and as the community has highlighted to our team, It is part of a number of vulnerable communities across Canada that have those vulnerabilities for unacceptable reasons. And as part of that, we need to establish procurement models and resource on a Canada-wide level. Mathias Coulombe was named as part of a greater model in trying to understand what needs would be not only for a first wave, but a second or third wave. And as you've heard in prior testimony, but I'm glad to reiterate it, the press release from the company that was selected to provide these units was a little hasty, and in fact mischaracterized what these very important units are for. And as a result, the community was surprised, and that's not right. And I'll concede that they had this pandemic.
So, and if I can stop you there,
for what it needed in its community and
you're not answering the questions, Mr. Miller. Your letter in response to our letter did not provide any answers. You reference First Nations leaders. You reference to sort of there's generalities. The reality is here in our constituency there are 21 remote First Nations. Pucketawagan is one of them. So why Pucketawagan and no other community? We and certainly as MP, but Pucketawagan and all communities in our region deserve exact answers. Who made these requests from your department? And I'm not interested in explanations around what surge capacity is. I understand. The reality is that Pucketawagan was singled out and frankly was used. Now, answer if you could please answer me this. Your government, after all of this scandal came out, finally confirmed and agreed to spending $449,460 to upgrade the youth in Pucketawagan, the way of having the community be prepared for COVID-19. However, your government preferred to spend almost double that amount, $766,140.34 on these tents that nobody asked for from a company who was chaired by a former Liberal cabinet minister. So the question is, how is it acceptable that your government benefited a Liberal and only then committed a mere half of the money to a community that's desperate to have the proper infrastructure in place? Does it take a scandal to get even half of what of the kind of money that your government's committing and to live up to the urgent needs of First Nations?
Well, I would submit to you, Ms. Ashton, this is not how procurement works. We were working with the community already to respond to their pandemic plan, and indeed, were you to ask them, they would say that they're, and I do not purport to speak for them, they're quite happy with the result right now. But that was something that was well in the works, to the best of my understanding. Again, the surge capacity nature of the procurement was such that these tents, which are in very, very tents, they are very expensive movable structures with a medical purpose that can be used in many ways. They are in very, very high demand in the communities that need them. We respond proactively to, but obviously we have to predict for second or third waves, and that's why that procurement occurs on a national scale. And we're glad to work with communities that require any of these, and the communities that have used them are quite happy. Obviously, they're not happy with the conditions that create the need, but obviously it's something that we need to continue moving forward and we will.
Sure. I mean, let me just remind both you and the committee, the chief used the word paternalism to describe this announcement. These are very serious and frankly, the serious words to describe what your government did. So let's move on to other communities.
There's only 10 seconds left, Miss Ashton. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I'll follow up in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're going to a 5-minute round, but I'm modifying it because of the problems earlier. So Mr. Viersen will be followed by Ms. Berube for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Zimmer will be followed by Ms. Kakak. And then we will wrap up the meeting with a vote with regard to our budget. So, Mr. Viersen, the floor is yours, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests and witnesses for being here today. Minister INAN, last time we spoke, I was asking you about the procurement and if Indigenous companies were being able to bid on these contracts, and had any Indigenous companies been awarded contracts for PPE with the federal government. Just wondering if you can give us an update on that.
Thank you so much for asking me that question again, because in that format, we don't have a large opportunity to have an interchange. So as you know, PSPC is very committed to collaborating with Indigenous suppliers, and we have awarded 12 contracts to 10 Indigenous businesses for a total amount of about $40 million at the current time. In addition, I am very much advocating open competitions or RFP processes in which we can target specifically Indigenous businesses. And in that vein, we actually have launched an RFP process for the production of cloth masks. And this is targeted specifically to Indigenous businesses. And so the answer to the question is yes, we are definitely encouraging and attempting to ensure that Indigenous businesses are participating in the procurement process.
Minister, how many employees does your department have?
My department has many in the thousands, and I'm going to turn it over to Ariane Reza, who will respond directly to that question. Ariane.
Hi, the PSPC has approximately 12,000 employees.
All right, thank you. Minister, were you aware that there was an online trivia game hosted by your department on Wednesday for employees as a morale building exercise?
I was not aware of that. As you know, the department is run by the Deputy Minister, Mr. Bill Matthews.
Do you have any idea? Could you find out for me what that morale building exercise cost? There's 12,000 employees for PSPC, and there was you can view the video online on YouTube, and there was 400 participants. And I'm also wondering if that was a sole source contract. And do you think that this was a good use of taxpayers' money during a pandemic when many Canadians are losing their jobs?
Well, thank you for the question, and I will get back to you.
Okay, thanks. Do you know how many masks we have signed contracts for throughout this pandemic?
We have signed hundreds of contracts, both domestically and internationally, for PPE, and many of those are for masks. As you know, surgical masks, cloth masks, N95 masks. We're dealing with multiple different types of masks. And in particular, I will ask Ariane Reza, who is in our department and who's in charge of many of these contracts, to speak to your question as well. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Just to add, yes, we have bought many masks to meet the frontline needs of healthcare workers, including a range of N95s, surgical masks, as well as non-medical masks and disposable masks.
Minister, there's been reports of contaminated masks, and it seems that they've been diverted from the medical field to other communities. Have any of these contaminated masks ended up in First Nation communities? Minister Anand?
My apologies. You are correct that we for sure attempt to repurpose masks and have done so, and none of these have been diverted to Indigenous communities at all.
Okay. Do you know what company has been supplying us the contaminated masks?
I would like to indicate that the masks that I believe you're referring to did not meet the specifications of the Public Health Agency of Canada. However, they are able to be used in other sectors. And given the negotiations with the supplier at the current time, it would be prudent for us not to disclose the particulars of that negotiation.
That brings us to time there. I'm sorry, Mr. Viersen. Madam Berube, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, and so please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Minister Miller. As you know, the Commission of Health and Social Services, First Nations of Quebec and Labrador, published a document in 2018 where they noted that there were many gray zones in the jurisdictional aspect of First Nations health. What do you believe about clarifying the legal framework regarding public health in First Nations communities that are not covered by agreement? Thank you, Ms. Berube. This is a question that does not only affect health, but many other sectors when you look at constitution and jurisdiction and how social services are delivered. There's also medical assistance that is primordial. There is, in fact, sometimes overlap, and sometimes there are shortcomings, as we've seen with COVID. Clearly, we know that people are making efforts to counter this, but sometimes there are shortcomings in terms of EPI, in terms of nursing services. This is a jurisdiction that not only falls to the federal crown, but the provincial crown as well. It's a challenge. I have to admit that. But the reality is that, and again, I'm not citing Quebec as an example, but when you look at the proactive reaction by the department regarding a northern remote community in Saskatchewan, which is not 90% Indigenous, but which is a reserve, and it required coordination with the province and with the surrounding elder community as well. It's not so much a conflict, but we have the duty to cooperate that we must put in place. Now, we need to continue on, even though we may have some philosophical differences in terms of our jurisdictions. So again, I'd like to admit that point in part, but I'd say as well that we need to make greater efforts in order to better coordinate our work and to deliver adequate health service that everybody is entitled to.
Our modified round of questioning now moves back to Mr. Zimmer for his 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to Ministers Miller and our procurement minister. I had a question. I want to first of all thank Minister Miller for some of the issues that he's been involved with in helping in northern BC, and wanted to first recognize your efforts there, Minister, and being a good person to contact and follow up. I did want to ask a question about PPE to the procurement minister. We've heard from many communities, especially our Indigenous communities. I have an example of one just north of my hometown, that they were left scrambling once they had a few COVID cases for things like masks and things like hand sanitizer and the like. And for us, we had, and they had also, members of the community had understood that there was an emergency stockpile that they had or were to have access to, but that simply wasn't available when they needed it. Do you acknowledge that there were shortages of PPE during the pandemic?
The pandemic has seen an unparalleled growth and demand in PPE across the country and this world, and we have been working extremely hard and successfully so at sourcing PPE. And as I believe you're referencing, the National Emergency Stockpile contains a set aside for Indigenous communities. All of our procurement for the health sector has been on the basis of requests that have come from the Public Health Agency of Canada. I believe Minister Miller could speak to the large numbers of PPE that have been delivered to Indigenous communities.
Go ahead, Minister Miller.
Yes, and thank you. From the get-go, the challenge of getting personal protective equipment into communities, we had our own stockpile. So the issue was one that was more logistical and assuring that we had that link within community to actually understand the needs, what nursing stations needed. But the department's been pretty proactive, and we've been moving from a slower response time to a much quicker one. Clearly, communities have specific needs, and it takes work. Have we experienced shortages? I would have to talk to my team about that, but generally the response rate has been pretty quick. Where there have been misunderstandings, it's always been in the haste of trying to just get things out and figuring it out afterwards. But I wouldn't qualify any challenges we've had as specifically challenges that were in relation to Indigenous communities other than remoteness. But clearly this is something that we're conscious about.
And sorry, Minister Miller, for interrupting. I just have a limited amount of time. I guess my question is, I understand that as an answer from your perspective in Ottawa, and that's maybe what the ministry has said to you, that this all was available and it was accessible, et cetera. But the reality on the ground was it wasn't. And so my question as a follow-up is, and this is a difficult one, if it's currently understood that everything was going fine or has functioned fine with COVID, but my question is what is being done to correct those lag times in getting supplies? So as an example, Reserve, again, in my community was needing supplies. Simply, they were scrambling, going to Walmart. I was even helping with some of the supplies and getting some of it at Walmart and different grocery stores to try and get this to address the problem. If that's the reality on the ground, what is being done so that doesn't happen again? And I think it goes back to the question of what Minister INAN had said about the NESS, the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. Strategic would mean that all these stockpiles of PPE are located in areas that they're accessible within a few hours, I would guess. And if it isn't that way now, what is being done so that is the way it is in the future?
45 seconds.
I could speak to that. I am regularly in contact with my counterparts in procurement across the provinces and territories. And on one of our meetings, the procurement minister in Nunavut said that Nunavut needed swabs, and we had swabs to Nunavut in 24 hours. Certainly
there's a lot of stories where they're successful, but I'm talking about the stories that they didn't have access to PPE. And those are the questions I think that need to be answered even more.
Minister Haidu,
didn't exist, I get that, but where the problem did exist, we need to answer that and get the supplies to those places.
I agree. I'm sure my colleague Minister Miller agrees also. I will say that Minister Haidu, who is in charge of the Public Health Agency of Canada, or it's under her purview, has said that she will review the mandate of the national stockpile, as it was never designed for a pandemic of this nature. But we agree with you that we need to make sure we have efficiencies in distribution of PPE.
Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Kakak, you have to conclude our modified round. 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Matna Chair. And I'll just start by saying we are starting this late because we are still waiting on the ministers to come on, knowing full well we've been doing this for a number of weeks. We know how sound check works. This is why we get online a half hour before, and these are very, very important questions to be answered. And exactly as has been said, we're looking at what needs to change and where we need to make improvements, where the Liberal government needs to make improvements. I don't think that it's fully appreciated what impression that Indigenous communities get when a Liberal insider is given a contract, but so many of our basic requests go unanswered. Nunavut only has 7 ventilators. We only have solid testing in 2 of the 25 communities. We don't have enough clean water. TB, tuberculosis, is still rampant, and there are so many other things. If SARS, H1N1, and COVID-19 aren't the right time to act on long-term investments for people, then when is the right time? Minister Miller, I'll start there.
MP Kakak, I will be very short with that, and I will simply say that I agree with your statement. I think we need to take a look and take a really sober look at the needs going forward as to what the new normal is. Massive infrastructure investments. We look at overcrowding. And sure, I could tell you about the investments that the government has made since 2015, but you probably don't want to hear that because that isn't the situation in communities that have overpopulation, and it makes more susceptibility to tuberculosis. Those rates are unacceptable anywhere in the world, let alone one of the best countries in the world. So I think you're absolutely right in your observation. I would simply say that in response to the point about a liberal insider, I have no knowledge of this person, and I don't believe this person had any influence in any form of decision making at all. And I would just simply leave it at that, because I think your first point was exceedingly important, and I think we'll leave it at that.
Well, I think that's very interesting, considering my colleague had just given us a concrete example of the types of scandals that we do see all too often for our communities. And I know I'm running out of time, Chair, but I think that it's incredibly important that ministers aren't only, here to speak on things, and we see constant lack of action, but to be on time and to be respectful. We are here for our constituents, trying to do a job, and we have been prevented in doing that to the best of our ability simply because of time management issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kakak, and thanks to our
Point
ministers.
of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this motion has been on the table for weeks now. We've known about this meeting since midweek this week. The minister was almost 15 minutes late in attending this meeting, and it's cut into our question time. I think this is completely unacceptable. I know MP Vancouverton suggested sharing his time, which was much appreciated. But the fact is that, this is of no fault of our own and something that could have been plainly avoided. This is unacceptable. So can we extend the time? Can we have the minister come back at another time? Truly, this has meant that the minister has not been here to answer the tough questions that he should be answering.
Well, Mr. Chair, point of order, Mr. Chair, if I may just speak to that. I completely appreciate Ms. Kakak's point and Ms. Ashton. The issue is that Mr. Miller was on the call at 1 o'clock. At 12 o'clock. There was technical issues that prevented him from coming on. That is a systematic problem. It's not a problem of the minister being delayed. He was here on time, for the record, and there was a connection that took long. In spite of that, I believe from the government side, we've given up our time to ensure that in a normal course of an hour, the time that the NDP would have is satisfied, as well as that of the bloc. So I do think it's been we've acted in fairness, and I do believe that we've fulfilled the requirements of the motion.
Thanks. That was the point of modifying it so that the opposition members would get their proper time, which they did get. And so we will stop it there with thanks to everyone who did attend today. And now I have a motion to adopt the study budget. And this will be a recorded vote. So members, please pay attention now as I put the motion forward to you that a proposed budget in the amount of $4,000 for the study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic be adopted. Madam Clerk.
Okay, before we proceed, I would like to inform the committee that the list of members eligible to vote are the following: Jamie Schmel, Gary Vidal, Arnold Viersen, Bob Zimmer, Sylvie Berube, Milak Kakak, Gary Anadasangari, Hamy Baptiste, Marcus Pulowski, Adam Van Koeverden, Lenore Zan. When your name is called, please allow 2 to 3 seconds before answering, clearly and verbally, if you are in favor or opposed to the motion. Your video should be turned on. Jamie Schmel.
In favor.
Gary Vidal.
Yes, in favor.
Arnold Viersen.
In favor.
Bob Zimmer.
Yes.
Sylvie Berube.
Oui.
Yes.
Kakak.
In favor.
Gary Anadasangari.
In favor.
Hamy Baptiste.
Yes.
Marcus Pulowski.
Yes.
Adam Van Koeverden.
We have lost Mr. Van Koeverden.
Lenore Zan.
Yes, I vote in favor.
Mr. Chair, 10 yeas.
Thank you very much. That carries. We have now paid off the costs of operating our COVID response. Thank you very much. Thanks to all. We'll be in touch offline via email with regard to issues coming forward. But at this time, I want to thank once again all of our committee members for your work today. I thought it was really well done. Also to our staff, to our clerk, to our analyst, and all the people who support us. It's a very difficult thing, I know, technically, but I think we still need to at least train ourselves as to the proper way, the most efficient way of doing this. My technical apex was the steam locomotive, and I'm doing it, so everyone else should be able to manage the technical issues, and so hopefully that'll be cleaned up for the next time. That is our meeting for today. This meeting is now adjourned.